The sun-baked earth of Whispering Pines Ranch stretched out under the vast Texas sky, a patchwork of dusty paddocks and weathered fences. The air hummed with the lazy drone of cicadas, punctuated by the occasional snort or whinny from the retired horses that called this place home. It was a sanctuary for these former champions, a place where they could live out their days in peace, far from the roar of rodeo crowds and the pressure of competition. Among the residents, one stood out, a magnificent quarter horse named Maverick. His coat gleamed like polished copper in the afternoon sun, a testament to the meticulous care he received. Maverick's powerful muscles, honed from years in the rodeo circuit, rippled beneath his skin as he moved with an easy grace around his paddock. Wren Holbrook, the ranch's dedicated caretaker, leaned against the fence, her eyes following Maverick's movements. She'd known him since his glory days, when he was the talk of every rodeo from Houston to Amarillo. Now she watched over him and the other retirees, ensuring their twilight years were as comfortable as possible. "How's our champion doing today, old friend?" Wren called out, her voice carrying the warm twang of a Texas native. Maverick's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, and he ambled over, pressing his velvety muzzle against her outstretched hand. Wren chuckled, fishing an apple slice from her pocket. "Here you go, big guy. Your favorite." As Maverick munched contentedly, Wren's gaze drifted over the ranch. The afternoon routine was in full swing, volunteers mucking out stalls, filling water troughs, and distributing feed. It was a well-oiled machine, each person and animal playing their part in the daily symphony of ranch life. But something felt off. Wren couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a tension in the air, like the stillness before a storm. She shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling. "Must be imagining things," she muttered to herself. As the afternoon wore on, Wren couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something was amiss. She found herself checking on Maverick more frequently than usual, drawn by an inexplicable worry. Each time she passed his paddock, the quarter horse seemed more agitated, pacing back and forth along the fence line, his tail swishing nervously. "What's got you so worked up, boy?" Wren asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Maverick's behavior was so out of character for the usually calm and collected horse. He'd always been the steady one, unflappable even in the face of bucking broncos and charging bulls. But now, he seemed almost frantic, his eyes wide and nostrils flaring. Wren entered the paddock, approaching Maverick slowly. "Easy there, big fella," she soothed, her voice low and calming. But as she reached out to stroke his neck, Maverick suddenly reared up, pawing at the air with his front hooves. Startled, Wren stumbled backward, her heart racing. "Maverick, what's gotten into you?" Before she could react further, Maverick wheeled around and galloped towards the fence. With a powerful leap that belied his years, the former rodeo champion soared over the top rail, landing with a thunderous impact on the other side. "Maverick!" Wren shouted, her voice cracking with panic. She sprinted to the gate, fumbling with the latch as she watched the horse disappear down the dusty road leading away from the ranch. Without a second thought, Wren ran to her old pickup truck, the engine sputtering to life as she turned the key. Gravel sprayed from beneath the tires as she peeled out of the driveway, following the cloud of dust that marked Maverick's path. Come on," Wren muttered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was Maverick spooked by something? Had he somehow sensed a threat to the ranch? In all her years working with horses, she'd never seen anything like this. As Wren's truck rumbled into town, she caught glimpses of Maverick ahead, his powerful strides eating up the distance. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared, pointing at the horse galloping down Main Street as if he owned it. Old Mrs. Abernathy nearly dropped her shopping bags, her mouth agape as Maverick thundered past. "Lord have mercy," Wren heard her exclaim as she drove by. "Is that Maverick from Whispering Pines?" At the town's only stoplight, a group of teenagers on bikes scrambled to get out of the way, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. One boy, his cap askew, shouted, "Did you see that? It's like something out of a movie." Ren's heart pounded in her chest as she navigated the familiar streets, now transformed into an obstacle course. She called out apologies as she passed bewildered townsfolk, her eyes never leaving Maverick's retreating form. Where on earth is he going? Ren wondered aloud, racking her brain for any clue that might explain Maverick's bizarre behavior. The horse showed no signs of slowing down, his determined gait carrying him deeper into town. As they approached the outskirts, Ren's confusion deepened. There was nothing out here except for... Her breath caught in her throat as realization dawned. The only building of note in this direction was Oak Ridge General Hospital. Sure enough, Maverick made a beeline for the hospital's main entrance, his hooves clattering on the pavement as he came to an abrupt stop before the sliding glass doors. Ren screeched to a halt behind him, leaping out of the truck with her heart in her throat. "Maverick," she called out, approaching the horse cautiously. "What are we doing here, boy?" The quarter horse stood stock still, his sides heaving from the exertion of his impromptu journey. His eyes, usually so calm and gentle, were fixed on the hospital entrance with an intensity that sent a shiver down Ren's spine. As she reached out to take hold of Maverick's halter, the hospital doors slid open. A nurse stepped out, her eyes widening at the sight before her. Is that a horse?" she stammered, looking from Maverick to Ren in disbelief. "I'm so sorry," Ren began, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "He just took off from the ranch and I—" But before she could finish her explanation, an older man in scrubs pushed past the stunned nurse. His weathered face broke into a smile of recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "If it isn't Maverick from Whispering Pines." Ren blinked in surprise. "You know him?" The man nodded, his eyes never leaving Maverick. "Name's Quentin. I used to volunteer at your ranch years ago." He took a step closer, his hand outstretched towards the horse. "But what in the world is he doing here?" As if in answer to Quentin's question, Maverick let out a soft whinny, his gaze still fixed on the hospital entrance. Ren shook her head, at a loss for words. "I have no idea. He just took off. I've never seen him act like this before." Quentin's brow furrowed as he studied Maverick, a look of concentration on his face. After a moment, he turned to Ren, his eyes glinting with a mixture of curiosity and... was that hope? "You know," he said slowly, "my grandma used to tell stories about animals having a sixth sense for these things, knowing when something was wrong, or when they were needed." Ren raised an eyebrow, skepticism warring with the undeniable strangeness of the situation. "What are you saying?" Quentin took a deep breath, glancing back at the hospital before meeting Ren's gaze. "I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, Maverick is here for a reason, and I think we ought to find out what that reason is." As Ren stood there, caught between disbelief and a growing sense of wonder, she couldn't help but feel that they were on the brink of something extraordinary. Whatever had brought Maverick to this place, at this moment, was about to change everything. Do you believe animals truly have a sixth sense for moments like these? What do you think Maverick's reason for being here might be? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming and mysterious stories. Quentin's weathered hands rested on Maverick's neck, his touch gentle and familiar. The old nurse's eyes crinkled at the corners, a mix of wonder and determination etched across his face. "You know," he said, turning to Ren, "I've seen a lot in my years here, but never anything quite like this." Ren nodded, her gaze flicking between Quentin and Maverick. "So what do we do now?" Quentin straightened up, squaring his shoulders. "Well, I reckon we ought to find out why this old boy's come all this way." He glanced at the hospital entrance, then back at Maverick. "And I've got a feeling we need to let him inside to do that." Ren's eyes widened. "Inside? But it's a hospital. You can't just—" "Sometimes," Quentin interrupted softly. "You've got to trust your gut. And right now, my gut's telling me Maverick here has a purpose." With a decisive nod, Quentin turned to the young nurse who still stood frozen in the doorway. "Sally, Go fetch Dr. Patel. Tell him. Tell him we've got an unusual situation that needs his attention." As Sally scurried off, Quentin placed a reassuring hand on Ren's shoulder. "Don't you worry. I've been here long enough to know when to bend the rules a little." Moments later, Dr. Patel emerged, his face a mask of confusion as he took in the scene before him. "Quentin, what on earth is going on? Is that a horse?" Quentin stepped forward, his voice low and urgent as he explained the situation. Dr. Patel listened, his expression shifting from disbelief to cautious curiosity. "I know it sounds crazy," Quentin finished, "but I've got a feeling about this. Call it an old man's intuition if you want, but I think we need to let Maverick in." Dr. Patel ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, conflict clear in his eyes. "This goes against every protocol we have," he muttered. "Sometimes," Quentin replied, echoing his earlier words to Ren. "You've got to trust your gut." After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Patel nodded. "All right. But if anything goes wrong, it's on you, Quentin." As if understanding the gravity of the moment, Maverick stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the hospital entrance. Ren held her breath as Dr. Patel pushed the door open wide. "Okay, big fella," Quentin murmured, gently guiding Maverick forward. "Nice and easy now." The horse's hooves clicked against the linoleum floor as he stepped into the hospital lobby. The noise echoed through the suddenly silent space, drawing every eye in the vicinity. A collective gasp rippled through the waiting area. Patients, visitors, and staff alike stared in open-mouthed amazement as Maverick, guided by Quentin and followed closely by Ren and Dr. Patel, made his way across the lobby. "Is that a horse?" a young boy whispered, tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Shh, honey," the mother replied, her own eyes wide with disbelief. At the nurses' station, a cluster of staff members huddled together, their hushed voices a mix of confusion and excitement. "I can't believe Dr. Patel allowed this," one nurse hissed. "It's got to be some kind of therapy animal, right?" another suggested uncertainly. Quentin ignored the whispers and stares, his focus solely on Maverick. The horse moved with surprising grace through the hallways, his powerful presence somehow both out of place and strangely fitting in the sterile hospital environment. As they approached the elevator, Dr. Patel held up a hand. "Wait, we can't possibly fit him in there. We'll have to take the service elevator in the back." Ren nodded, falling into step beside Maverick as they changed course. She couldn't help but notice how calm the horse seemed, as if he knew exactly where he was going. The service elevator creaked under Maverick's weight, but held firm as they ascended to the third floor. As the doors slid open, Quentin paused, his brow furrowed in thought. "You know," he said slowly, "we've got a young patient down this way. Been in a coma for weeks now. Name's Jasper. His folks are beside themselves with worry." At the mention of Jasper's name, Maverick's ears perked up, and he let out a soft whinny. Ren's eyes widened in recognition. "Jasper?" she repeated. "Not Jasper Holloway?" Quentin nodded. "That's the one. You know him?" Ren's mind raced back to sunny afternoons at the ranch, the sound of children's laughter mixing with the gentle nickering of horses. "He used to visit the ranch," she explained. "He and Maverick, they had a special bond." As if confirming her words, Maverick took a step forward, his gaze fixed down the hallway. Quentin and Dr. Patel exchanged a look of amazement. "Well," Dr. Patel said softly, "I think we know where we're headed." They made their way down the corridor, the steady clip-clop of Maverick's hooves drawing curious glances from every room they passed. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hall. A small placard read, "Jasper Holloway." Dr. Patel hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. "I should warn you," he said, his voice low. "Jasper's condition is delicate. He hasn't shown any signs of improvement in weeks." Ren nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Quentin gave Maverick a gentle pat on the neck. "All right, big fella. This is it. As the door swung open, the first thing Ren noticed was the steady beep of machines. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner and the various monitors surrounding the bed. And there, in the center of it all, lay Jasper. The boy looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, his face pale and still. A woman sat by his bedside, her head bowed and her hand clasping Jasper's. At the sound of the door opening, she looked up, her tired eyes widening in shock as she took in the unlikely group entering the room. "Mrs. Holloway," Dr. Patel said gently, "I know this is unusual, but—" Before he could finish, Maverick let out a soft nicker, his eyes fixed on Jasper's still form. Mrs. Holloway's gaze shifted from the doctor to the horse, recognition dawning on her face. "Maverick?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But how—" Ren stepped forward, quickly explaining the day's events. As she spoke, Maverick moved closer to the bed, his nose gently nuzzling Jasper's hand. For a moment, the room was silent save for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Then, almost imperceptibly, Jasper's fingers twitched. Mrs. Holloway gasped, leaning forward. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. "He moved!" Dr. Patel moved swiftly to Jasper's side, checking the monitors with a practiced eye. His brow furrowed in concentration as he studied the readouts. "This is remarkable," he murmured. "His brain activity is increasing. It's subtle, but it's definitely there." Quentin smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Well, I'll be. Looks like our Maverick here knew exactly what he was doing." As if in response, Maverick let out another soft nicker, his breath ruffling Jasper's hair. And then, to everyone's amazement, Jasper's eyelids fluttered. "Jasper?" Mrs. Holloway called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Honey, can you hear me?" For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Jasper's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, blinking in the dim light of the room. But as his gaze settled on Maverick, a spark of recognition flashed across his face. "Mav?" The word was barely audible, little more than a breath, but it sent a jolt through everyone in the room. Mrs. Holloway burst into tears, her hands clasping Jasper's. Dr. Patel rushed to the boy's side, quickly checking his vitals and responses. I've never seen anything like it," the doctor muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's as if he's been waiting for this moment." Ren felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. Maverick stood steady by Jasper's bedside, his presence a calm anchor in the whirlwind of emotion filling the room. Over the next hour, the room buzzed with activity. More doctors were called in, tests were run, and through it all, Maverick remained by Jasper's side, as if standing guard over the boy's miraculous recovery. As the initial shock wore off, Dr. Patel pulled Quentin and Ren aside. "I can't explain this medically," he said, his voice low. "By all accounts, Jasper shouldn't have woken up, at least not like this. It's as if Maverick's presence triggered something in him." Quentin nodded, a knowing smile on his face. "Sometimes the things that heal us best aren't found in any medical textbook." As the day wore on, news of the miraculous event spread through the hospital like wildfire. Staff members found excuses to pass by Jasper's room, hoping to catch a glimpse of the horse who had seemingly worked a miracle. Jasper's father arrived, his face a mix of shock and joy as he took in the scene. His son awake and alert, with a full-grown horse standing vigil by his bedside. As evening approached, Dr. Patel reluctantly suggested that Maverick should return to the ranch. "We need to run more tests," he explained. "And as much as I hate to admit it, we can't keep a horse in the hospital indefinitely." Ren nodded, understanding the logic, but feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of separating Maverick and Jasper. But to everyone's surprise, it was Jasper who spoke up. Can Maverick come back tomorrow?" His voice was weak but clear, his eyes moving between his parents and the doctor. Dr. Patel hesitated, then smiled. "I think we can arrange that. After all, I'd say Maverick has earned visiting privileges." As Ren prepared to lead Maverick out, Jasper reached out a hand, gently patting the horse's nose. "Thank you," he whispered, and Maverick nickered softly in response. The journey back through the hospital was markedly different from their entrance. Where before there had been shock and confusion, now there were smiles and whispers of amazement. As they reached the lobby, a spontaneous round of applause broke out, staff and patients alike celebrating the miracle they had witnessed. Outside, the Texas sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Ren patted Maverick's neck, her heart full of wonder at the day's events. "You did good, old friend," she murmured. "You did real good." As they made their way back to the ranch, Ren couldn't help but marvel at the chain of events that had led to this moment. A horse's inexplicable behavior, an old nurse's intuition, and a bond between boy and animal that transcended understanding. It all came together to create something truly miraculous. Back at Whispering Pines Ranch, the other horses nickered in greeting as Maverick returned to his paddock. Ren watched as he moved with quiet dignity to his favorite spot, as if the day's adventure had been nothing out of the ordinary. As the stars began to twinkle in the vast Texas sky, Ren leaned against the fence, her mind replaying the day's events. She thought of Jasper, awake and on the road to recovery, and of the joy on his parents' faces. She thought of Dr. Patel's amazement and Quentin's knowing smile. But most of all, she thought of Maverick, the ex-rodeo champion who had become so much more. A healer, a miracle worker, a true friend. As she reached the porch, Ren paused, looking back at Maverick one last time. The horse stood tall in the moonlight, a silent sentinel in the Texas night. And though she couldn't explain it, Ren felt certain that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Jasper and Maverick, but for everyone whose lives they had touched on this remarkable day. As if sensing her thoughts, Maverick lifted his head, his eyes meeting Ren's in the gathering darkness. And in that moment, Ren knew that she had been part of something truly extraordinary, a reminder that in this vast, often inexplicable world, the bonds we form can work wonders beyond our wildest dreams. With a soft smile, Ren turned towards the ranch house, the gentle sounds of the horses following her like a lullaby. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and undoubtedly, a flurry of questions about the day's events. But for now, she was content in the knowledge that sometimes, the most powerful healing comes not from medicine or machines, but from the pure, unspoken connection between a boy and his horse.